blasts continued in central Kyiv today as an African delegation visited Ukraine on a peace mission. The visit comes at a time when top officials warned that several other Russian missiles might be headed towards Ukraine. Meanwhile, African leaders are visiting Ukraine in a bid to broker peace between Kyiv and Moscow, despite three presidents dropping out and Ukraine's counter-offensive overshadowing the mission. Four African presidents and three representatives are also due to hold talks with Ukrainian President Zelensky in Kiev before heading to St. Petersburg tomorrow to meet his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin.
Every peace plan should not lead to freezing of the conflict, because those who think that the urgent task is to freeze the conflict and then to see how to fix it afterwards, they are wrong.
All BRICS countries are involved in trying to find resolution to the crisis. And this is a collective of the BRICS. It was discussed and welcomed by all parties, including friends of BRICS. And I think this again demonstrates BRICS' commitment to see an end to the conflict and a negotiated settlement. Most recently announced African leaders initiative involving 6 African countries, including South Africa, with President Ramaphosa leading us in a visit very soon to both Ukraine as well as Russia, and as African leaders to see how we can also try and mediate in finding a diplomatic solution to the Russia-Ukraine crisis.
From the war zone, that is amid the Ukraine conflict with Russia, what we are learning is that African nations are trying to broker some level of peace between the two sides when it comes to trying to establish some sort of ceasefire between the two sides. And what we are learning is that many African leaders have reached Ukraine in order to achieve a peace deal between the two sides, between Putin as well as Zelensky. But at the end of the day, what can they tangibly achieve? I'm joined by Valentin Yakushik from the Ukrainian Institute of Politics. Thank you, Mr. Yakushik, for joining us on CNN News 18. What, in your opinion, can these African nations tangibly provide when it comes to their mission to achieving a peace deal?
I think this is a great mission for reassuring or reestablishing the role of African nations in world politics. It's very good for the leaders of these countries who participate in this mission to show that they are really interested in bringing peace to Ukraine and to Russia. But looking realistically at possible results, I would say that there will be zero result for this war at this stage, because what is proposed, it is illogical and unnatural for this period, for this stage of the war, when both sides, Russian side and Ukrainian, together with the supporters from NATO to Ukraine, they want to have total victory. They want to resolve the conflict in the battlefield at this stage. And in the nearest weeks and probably months or 2 months, there will be fear fighting. What the African leaders are proposing, from what we hear through mass media, it will be assessed in Russia, but not probably said openly, as a surrender, as capitulation, because Russian leadership, it wants to impose its views, its ideas on Ukraine totally, which presupposes Ukrainian neutrality, Ukrainian demilitarization, Ukraine being outside the Western alliance, EU and NATO, which is totally unacceptable for the Ukrainian state now. So what will be? Good visit good views, exchange of views between African leaders and Ukrainian leader, and exchange of views with Russian leader. And I think the real result will be that the African leaders, together with the Indian leader and with Chinese leadership, they should start thinking together how to produce a joint peace plan, not idealistic one, but a practical one. Now we heard a lot of such plans which want to impose peace on two nations who are fighting with each other after Russian invasion in February last year. So the third world countries, non-Western countries, the global South should act together by analyzing what was proposed by Brazil, by Indonesia, by South Africa, by India, Turkey, China, and to create their own vision how such nations, European nations, as Ukraine and Russia, and the European Union and the United States can move forward towards a compromise peace which will create real security for Europe, for Ukraine, for Russia, and how to help Ukraine to get reunified as a Ukrainian democratic and pluralistic state, and how Russia to avoid being dismantled, being destroyed as a state, as now we hear sometimes from several politicians that this is the plan. So the global South may propose a humanistic plan after what we experience now, attempt of African leaders to talk with Ukrainian president, then with Russian president, when you will see that nothing happens, only good talks, only good promotion of the image of African countries who are important actors in the present politics. After this, there should be big work. Maybe India can be organizer of such joint efforts to work out an alternative program from the South as to bringing peace to Eurasia and to avoid similar conflicts worldwide, because it may be only the start of the tragedy. Now we see Ukrainian tragedy and Russian ordinary people's tragedy. How to avoid nuclear use of nuclear tactical weapons, how to avoid tragedies of ecological catastrophes, because now during this current fighting, it may take over the Zaporizhia nuclear power station, which will be a new Chernobyl, much worse than Chernobyl. It should be avoided. So please look what you can put forward as your plan and how to work out real steps for compromise solution. Hopefully, after this month or 2 months of fierce fighting, there will be a place for the southern nations, for the global South, to explain your practical and realistic plans and to start implementing some elements of this step by step.
Right, but Mr. Yakushek, when it comes to the peace outreach that we are seeing from these African nations, let's talk about the current situation in the war zone and the situation between Ukraine and Russia. Given the creation of the buffer zone where there is constant conflict, where there's constant fighting, Russia expands its footprint, then Ukraine expands its footprint. There is the creation of a buffer zone between Ukraine and Russia. Do you think at the end of the day that has been Putin's endgame all along, to create a zone of constant conflict between Ukraine and Russia where you can play proxy warfare even against Western assets?
Well, Ukrainian plan is to create buffer zone on the Russian territory. If Russia is defeated, then it will be the plan to impose a buffer zone on the Russian side of the border. And also, Ukrainian leaders have explained that they would like some kind of control over Russian strategic weapons. So this is one plan, Ukrainian plan and Western plan. As to Russian plan, now we heard well, adventurous ideas of the former Russian President Medvedev, who said this buffer zone should be up to Lviv in western Ukraine. So these are maximalistic positions. But what will be the realistic position? It depends upon the results of the current Ukrainian counteroffensive at its first stage. Then there will be soon the second stage of this counteroffensive. If it is successful, and if the British members of parliament who analyze the situation that the Russian forces are to be put into a situation of chaos, that is one possible solution when Russia will have to accept a lot of demands and to reach compromise at a much worse situation for her. And when even such a wise person as Henry Kissinger, a strategist, he said at the end, the compromise will include only leaving Sevastopol to Russian state. So even Crimea, they would not be able to claim under any conditions. But if Russian forces are successful, and if they start their offensive, it will be another kind of proposed compromise on the kind of solution under Korean example, which was made in the 50s, and then there was division. We do not know what will happen, and I'm sure that there is no possibility for any implementation of any peaceful plan now in June and July. After this, we will see what can happen, what may be changes in the leadership in Russia, because there is a lot of attempts to undermine the unity of Russian elites, the unity of their armed forces. There are different possible solutions. There are many factors which have to be taken into account. Now we have to be patient, look and wait, and preparing realistic solutions. So India is a very important actor in this. With your humanistic history, your humanistic philosophy, you can do a lot to join your efforts together with Africans, with Brazilians, with Chinese, and propose something actual and workable on the basis of fair approach to establish real peace and to let Ukrainian nation to be reunified under democratic and pluralistic rule.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Yakushik, for sharing your perspective. We're also joined by Sanjay Suri on the broadcast to get the latest when it comes to this peace pitch from the African nations. Sanjay, what can these African nations tangibly actually bring to the table? Is this push that's coming in from many members of the African Union nothing more than a battle of optics?
Well, it is a little more than that, though it is not likely to achieve any success or any breakthrough by way of bringing peace. It's likely to have, as we were hearing, and as I would agree, I'm afraid, a zero result. What Africa has brought is a show of impartiality and neutrality. You have South Africa and together with Senegal, and these two have been inclined to be supportive of Russia, together with the Comoros Islands and with Zambia, who voted against Russia. You also have delegates from Uganda and Egypt. Again, Uganda soft on Russia, Egypt took a harder position, clearly an attempt to show neutrality. But really, this visit coming at the time when Russia has been raining missiles on Kyiv and in the area where the African delegation were. On that day they were visiting, at the time they were visiting, and this of course is hardly encouraging of peace. And the Ukrainian Prime Minister Kuleba was quite right, of course, when he said and when he tweeted that, well, Russia seems to want war because he has a peacekeeping mission underway under missiles. But really there is more than the peacekeeping attempt here. Africa is looking for grains, it is looking for fertilizer, and these two have been blocked by the war. It is looking in a limited way and to a limited extent, and most understandably, for some sort of a solution that enables more free flow of grain to African nations, more flow of fertilizer to African nations. And let's not forget, a lot of African nations are poor. A lot of people live on the margins, farmers live on the margins. This is their lifeline that has been severely threatened. It's not about lifestyle issues in Africa, it's about life issues. And this is what really the leaders are looking for through this visit to Ukraine and then to the Russian Federation.